Welcome everyone to our second webinar of the longevity series. We are very excited that you're here today. Some of you may have attended the previous one last month. I just want to remind everyone that we will be recording this webinar, so we will upload that on our YouTube channel. So if you have to go early or want to watch it later, we will provide that as well. Throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please just put it in the Q&A box here on Zoom, and we will get back to them in the end of the webinar, where we will be having a question and answering session. All right, so my name is Frida Hovik. I'm one of the registered dietitian at Create Cures Foundation. I did both my undergraduate degree and my graduate degree in nutrition. And I'm currently doing my PhD in clinical nutrition, and I'm very enthusiastic about preventing chronic diseases through personalized nutrition and fasting, and really optimizing health span and longevity for both our body and our brain. And today we're super excited. We're going to talk a lot about the very popular macronutrient protein. And hopefully you will all learn, and we will clarify a lot of things about this macronutrient.
Yes, my name is Katie Rines. I'm also a registered dietitian with the Create Cures Foundation, and I've been considering myself plant-based for over 10 years. This is probably the most common question I get, right? Like, where do you get your protein? What is the protein? How do you get protein in? So this is a really exciting talk. And I am so excited about this too. I remember being so fascinated with prevention of disease, working at a plant-based cafe in high school, which led me to getting my master's in human nutrition, becoming a dietitian, doing experiences working with Dr. Joel Furman, and working here with Frida at the Create Cures Foundation to help really prevent and maybe even reverse chronic diseases using food. So this is really exciting. We do have some promotions, so everybody take out your pen and paper, screenshot this. We have 35% off your first consultation with us at the Create Cures Foundation using the promotion code WebinarProtein 2022, and this expires in just a couple of weeks. We really hope to see you on virtual, or if you're local, maybe in the future, but definitely write this down. I hope to see you on my calendar. And also 30% off the Longevity Nutrition Masterclass. So if you're interested in learning and coming to webinars like this, you're probably really interested in learning more through our masterclass. Use the promotion code CME Summer 2022. Yes, if you want to prevent many diseases, or if you have been diagnosed with a non-communicable disease like cancer, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune, cardiovascular, and neurodegenerative diseases, our team at the Longevity and Healthspan Clinic at the Create Cures Foundation can support you, as well as collaborate with your personal doctor, primary physician, or specialist managing your care. I hope to see you on my calendar. Don't miss out on this promotion. All right, so what are we going to be talking about today? As I said, this is such a popular topic. How do I get enough protein? Am I getting in enough? We're going to talk about what even is protein, aging, and disease, lots of research around this, the intake recommendations, as well as best sources. We're going to be busting some myths. And of course, at the end, there will be a quiz. So be sure to pay attention.
Yes, a lot of great topics here today. So you may, if you go into a store or you watch any type of advertisement, we always see a lot of protein in the media, whether it's on the Cheerios box, a magazine in the store, or the yogurt. We do see this all the time. And it's easy to, because the media really emphasizes this importance of protein all the time, which of course is also true because we're made up of protein, so we do need it. However, an exaggeration of any macronutrient, whether it's protein, fats, or carbohydrates, we don't want to have an excess of any of these nutrients. So media's way often to give nutrition advice is very like simple, like, oh, cut all the carbs and only eat protein or only eat fats, or but the thing is that when the media is giving such a simple advice, it's usually more complex than that. So that's why it's great you're all here today, and we're going to learn more about protein. So what in the world is protein? Well, first of all, it's proteins are large complex molecules that are critical for functioning of our cells. It's essential for our growth, for our structures in the cell structure, for the function and regulation of the body's tissues and organs. It also helps us build bones and muscles and support our joints. And proteins are essentially made out of these building blocks that are called amino acids. We're going to talk a lot about this. And our body's protein needs are dependent on a variety of factors, such as our health, the activity level, the gender. So there are several factors that can influence how much proteins each individual needs. And then finally, also proteins in our blood maintain the fluid balance between the blood and the surrounding tissues. So we can definitely see that it has a lot of functions in our body. So I was mentioning that amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So we have the essential amino acids as well as non-essential amino acids. So the essential amino acids are amino acids, so the building blocks we do need to get from our food. You can see on the pictures here, we have to eat it because our body does not synthesize it on its own, versus the non-essential amino acids are amino acids that our body is synthesizing, so we don't have to emphasize these amino acids as much to get it from our diet as much as the essential one. So you may wonder, well, what foods has the essential and non-essential, and how will we know these things? So we are definitely going to cover that as well. So throughout the webinar today, we're going to have some questions and some different myths that we're going to mention. So if you can all feel free to write in the chat box the answer to this question, either true or false. And the statement is, plant foods do not have all 9 essential amino acids. So please write either true or false for this statement. So note that it says plant foods do not have all 9 essential amino acids. So I will take a look here in the chat box. False, false, false. So I see there are some true, false. Yeah, it's a pretty tricky question. So actually, we often think of like animal protein sources and plant-based sources. And actually, plant food sources, there are many that do contain all the 9 essential amino acids. And this is often not emphasized enough, but some example of plant-based sources that do contain all the 9 essential amino acids are food sources such as soy, quinoa, hemp, chia seeds are some great sources of amino acids that contain all the 9 essential amino acids. So not just animal products. So great job, everyone. All right, Katie's going to talk about complete protein.
Yes, I'm really impressed. A lot of people said false. I was thinking that everyone would say that's true, just because it's a misconception what even is a complete protein. And what a complete protein is, it's not necessarily the fact that food does not have any of a certain essential amino acid. It's really about the proportion of the essential amino acids. So as you can see in this chart, we have at the very bottom, you see the different essential amino acids and the different proportions from different foods. Comparing to a whole egg versus whole wheat, for example, you can see that whole wheat is almost a complete protein, right? It's very, very close to having these same proportions as a whole egg, but it does have a limiting amino acid at number 4, which is lysine. That's kind of common. And but if you pair that with something like navy beans, that's a little bit higher in that lysine, in that essential amino acid, that's limiting a little bit. then you can create a complete protein. You do not need to pair these at the same meal. Our bodies are actually really good at slowly assimilating proteins as necessary. So talking a little bit more about what makes a protein complete, it's really about how readily absorbed is this protein? How is our body able to hold on to and truly completely absorb what it's taking in? And there's so many different ways to measure this when it comes to like protein efficiency ratios. That's how they calculate how much. There's a lot of different ways. Like they'll measure from person to person how much mass was gained based on the different proteins that were taken in. They'll also measure nitrogen loss, things like that. And as you can see, there's one value here with the list that I put, a whole egg at a number of 100, whey protein concentrate is actually more than that, is absorbed more readily than an egg. Cow's milk, beef, soy, you can see these different numbers at how bioavailable, how readily absorbed, how well our body is able to use these proteins. And it's really interesting that yes, the soy, although it's very, very, very close to being almost like the ratio of amino acids as an egg, it's still lower in biological value. So I'm going to continue on the next slide. And let's talk about this high biologic value versus low biological value. So a complete, quote unquote, I feel like the words complete and incomplete is quite confusing because actually these are containing all of the essential amino acids, except they just are in different ratios. So it's a little confusing with that. High complete protein ratio of amino acid is readily utilized by the body. And the sources include animal sources like meat, eggs, and dairy, whereas low or quote unquote incomplete proteins, the ratio of the amino acids not well utilized, okay? So more slowly utilized, more slowly put together. Plant sources like whole grains, beans, peas, nuts, seeds, and vegetables, okay? All right. High biological value or complete quote unquote proteins are preferred for longevity. Is this true or false? Is this a myth or is this a truth? Please in the chat box, false. False, false, true, false, false, false. All right, we've got a really well-educated, like you've all done some research, it seems like, and this is also a really confusing question. As Frida mentioned earlier, our society, it's like protein this, protein that, make sure you get enough protein. Where's the protein in your meal? We really emphasize getting in a lot of protein. And those of you who said false, you are correct. In general, the lower biological value or incomplete proteins are preferred for longevity. Mice and humans that show IGF-1 deficiencies, there's so much research on this. There was actually a study that showed that meta-analysis published February 21st, 2022, it summarized that extensive data consistently show lower insulin-like growth factor 1 is associated with increased lifespan and health span. So basically, the lower the insulin-like growth factor 1 is, the more directly related with longer health span and longevity. Another study I want to point out, the mean serum, so that's the average insulin-like growth factor concentration, was 13% lower in vegan women. And this is a study of 292 women, comparing vegans with meat eaters and vegetarians, noticing that in vegan people, people who ate more plant-based, their insulin-like growth factor concentration was significantly lower. So intake of protein-rich in essential amino acids was positively associated with, so the more complete the proteins were, the more insulin-like growth factor there was in these people. So really, really interesting, making sure that we're clear, okay, there's different types of protein. Not all protein is created equal. And when it comes to longevity, we really want to pay attention to making sure that we're taking in proteins that are in alignment with our goals here. This is so cool. So May 21st, 2022, this research study came out. This has been an ongoing thing, researching growth factor and diseases and longevity. In this particular research study that was just published, they were attempting to minimize bioavailability of insulin-like growth factor to minimize cancer and disease. And what they were doing was seeing, okay, am I able to bind these, the sites at which it becomes absorbed and utilized? Like, how can we possibly make it so that insulin-like growth factor doesn't do its job? All right. More research is, of course, needed, but there's so much research showing that loss of insulin-like growth factor results in decreased metastasis, and that's cancer growth, right? So, and here is really just an image showing how this all works. So when we take in protein, our liver is going to pump out growth factor. Our liver is like, okay, sweet, we've got all these building blocks, let's grow. We're signaled to grow. And this stromal cell, a stromal cell is a cell, basically, it's in every organ, mostly in the bone marrow, that can turn into connective tissue of any organ. So it's like, okay, this connective tissue growth signaling, and then noticing that this is really increasing cell division. Our cells are being signaled, let's divide, let's divide, let's divide, let's grow, let's grow, let's grow. And it's decreasing apoptosis, which is another word for programmed cell death. Programmed cell death is extremely important if we want to take away any potentially mutated cells, old cells, damaged cells. And if we're decreasing the death of damaged cells and we're increasing cell division, this is a recipe not only for cancer growth, but it's also exacerbating aging, accelerating the aging process.
All right, very interesting. So now we're actually going to watch a brief video of individuals who are actually growth hormone recipient deficient. And we see in these individuals that despite maybe being obese, high alcohol intake, and living a very unhealthy lifestyle, because they are deficient in this growth hormone recipient, they actually do not develop chronic diseases. So we're going to talk more about it after this video here.
Living longer, living better. We're revealing what people across the country and around the world are doing to live longer. And NBC's Cynthia McFadden is here. She's going to help us get started. Cynthia, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Well, on the cutting edge of science, we journeyed to Ecuador to meet and learn from a group of unique people, less than 4 feet tall. Scientists believe their DNA may hold huge secrets that could one day benefit all of us. Meet the big-hearted little people protected from cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. High in the Andes Mountains, Quito, Ecuador is almost 10,000 feet above sea level. And looming large over the city, the giant Virgin of Quito statue. But the wonders of this place can come in small packages too. Meet the tiny Ecuadorians with a special gift, a rare condition that protects them from cancer, high blood pressure, and diabetes, maybe even Alzheimer's. Only one person with Laron syndrome has died from cancer.
Yes.
That's extraordinary.
It is. It is.
But there's a cruel trade-off. They can grow no taller than a small child because they have a unique form of dwarfism called Laron syndrome, a gene mutation that blocks them from absorbing growth hormone.
He's very, very short, 41.6 inches.
Like Yannick, who just turned 18, but is the size of a 5-year-old.
It's amazing. He's 18.
And 50-year-old Marcy, about the same height, but much heavier.
That is becoming worse. She has gained more weight. I always keep recommending her to do some things, but she never listens.
But she doesn't have diabetes.
She doesn't have diabetes. That's fascinating.
No diabetes, no high blood pressure.
100 to 60. Excellent blood pressure.
But he still worries that her weight might one day catch up with her. Does she take seriously your warning that she's pushing her luck? If you don't think there's a consequence, why bother, right?
Exactly.
Mercy and Yannick are two of only about 300 people with Laron syndrome in the entire world. 100 live in the villages of southern Ecuador. They're being studied by Dr. Jaime Guevara and Dr. Walter Longo, a leading researcher on aging at the University of Southern California. And Mercy's kitchen, confirmation of just how fattening her diet is.
Plenty of rice, you will find plenty of carbohydrates.
But it doesn't seem to matter, because so far, Mercy is just as healthy as someone going to the gym every day.
And so we see him define almost the type of diet that they have and say, it's okay, I can have a big plate of fries and there's nothing that this can do to me.
They constantly warn Mercy that being protected doesn't guarantee there will never be any consequences.
2 mice here.
But still, when Longo and his team gave lab rats Larons, the results in the smaller mouse who has the disorder were astonishing.
The mice live 50% longer and develop much less diseases. And this is remarkable and really the direction we want to go in. Can we extend the lifespan maybe a little bit, but decrease diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, Alzheimer's?
This work was published in 2011, and these Ecuadorian individuals that we saw in the video, they were followed for 22 years, and the research group had, prior to this visit and this study, studied how the mutations in growth signaling pathways extended lifespan. So as we see that these people who are IGF-1 or they're deficient in this receptor, but they still, and they don't develop these chronic diseases that their siblings would develop. So that's why they got curious in studying, well, how can normal people, or I mean, healthy individuals who are not deficient in this recipient, how can we reduce the IGF-1 factor and prevent chronic diseases to develop? So we will provide these slides so you can read more about this study, and then it's very interesting work.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this as well, right? Trying to witness, okay, there are things that we can do to reduce our insulin-like growth factor, and just seeing that population, how they're at such low risk of developing disease because of that mutation, because they don't have the insulin-like growth factor. Insulin-like growth factor is not the only growth factor. This is a super recent article that came in my inbox on longevity technology. Single hormone coordinates lifespan extension produced by low protein diet. So this was updated May 18th, 2022. Reducing the amount of protein in the diet produced an array of favorable health outcomes, including an extension of lifespan. And these effects depend on liver-derived metabolic hormone called fibroblast growth factor. So there's insulin-like growth factor, there's fibroblast growth factor. And as you can see, more and more research seems to be pointing to a lower protein approach to decreasing that to help with our lifespan and our health span. And this is the article it was referring to, and it was published April 7th, 2022. So this is very recent.
All right, so does protein accelerate aging? So we know that both dietary proteins, but also sugars activate the growth genes that do promote accelerating aging as well as disease. We know that most diseases are related to aging. So aging and disease often can go hand in hand, which is what we want to try to prevent. So certain biological mechanisms are controlled by proteins that may accelerate aging. All right, so how do we calculate the recommended protein intake? So the dietary reference intake, this is a set of reference values for all kinds of nutrients that are used to plan and assess the nutrient intakes of healthy people. So it's kind of like a general guidelines for the general population. And for this, the DRI for these healthy individuals are usually recommended to be 0.36 gram protein per pound of body weight. So that looks like 47 grams per day for a person who weighs 130 pounds of body weight. But as we know, protein needs, again, it depends on a lot of things. What are the activity levels? What is the gender, the body size, the age? There's a lot of factors to take into the consideration. That's why we always want to consult with a health professional who can guide us and find an individual recommendation for you instead of just copying like, oh, I saw this online or this person did that, because every individual has unique needs depending on these factors. So these are the dietary reference intake. However, the longevity recommended protein intake that we're emphasizing at our clinic are a little bit different. So below 65 years old, we do recommend to keep the protein intake pretty low, about 10% of the total calories. Again, this percentage may not make sense, like what is the total calories? Again, that's why we like to talk to a health professional to have like a consultation so you can have the exact number for your needs. And then another recommendation is that if a person is losing muscle mass or is an individual above the years of 65 years, we want a little bit higher protein needs, so between 10 and 20% of total calories from protein. You would, if you're above 65 or is losing muscle mass, you can also increase the protein intake by incorporate more fish, maybe a little bit of eggs and white meat and products from goats, for example, to preserve the muscle mass, because as we age, we become less active, we become more frail. So that's why we want to maintain and support that muscle mass. Some good recommendation for some fish, we want to recommend low mercury fish between 2 and 3 times a week. And there's a good acronym SMASH, which stands for sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. Great sources of protein and also a lot of other nutrients. And to calculate your longevity protein need, you will do your total calorie intake of the day, and then you multiply it by 0.10 because you want 10% of the total calories, and then you divide it by 4 because there's 4 calories per grams of protein, and then you get the grams of protein that is recommended for your needs. And yeah. All right.
So now that we see, okay, it looks like about 50 grams of protein, what does that look like? How can we incorporate this into our day-to-day, into our meals? So if it's 50 grams of protein per day, imagine just a half a block of tofu here, that's already about 23 grams of protein. So that's plenty, right? Just having that for a meal, you're already about half of your needs worth of protein. And that's so easy to hit that, thinking about getting in some peas at 8 grams of protein for a cup of peas. These all come together to really easily hit that number. And then this is comparing plant-based protein versus animal-based protein per 100 grams. As you can see, there's a lot of different colors and types of sources of plant-based protein. It's not just beans, right? Oats and nuts and even vegetables. There's amino acids in really all whole plant foods. And comparing to the animal-based protein, witnessing that these include things like, yes, cheese, milk, eggs, fish. These are going to be a little bit more quote unquote complete, whereas the plant-based proteins are going to be more they're going to be less readily absorbed. So it's going to be a good idea to just, get in the different sources. And beautiful. So now we can see in the middle here, if you haven't heard of tempeh, we've got with the chopsticks there, it looks like that tempeh slices. So that's a fermented soy product. And then below that in the middle, that's a tofu scramble. So it's like made to taste like scrambled eggs. If you just mash up tofu with some spices, lentil soup, we've got chia pudding. So chia seeds are a great source of protein, a bean wrap or a bean burrito. And then we've got like a chickpea stew curry situation in the bottom corner. There's lots of different options. And I also want to point out that we're not recommending to, just like Frida said at the beginning, we kind of tend to go to extremes like protein. And now we're hearing from this, okay, lower protein, no protein. That's not what we're saying. We're saying protein is definitely very, very, very important, and get it from mostly plant sources. We definitely want to be taking in an adequate amount of protein, which varies from person to person. So these are some great examples of things to try to add to your repertoire. All right, myth number 3, open up the chat box. Soy messes with hormones. True or false? Okay, we got someone saying true, true, false, 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 exclamation points. True every time I eat. Okay, false. Yeah, so this is really interesting. A lot of myths out there about soy. I know I've heard that soy contains estrogen. It has a feminizing effect on men. It increases cancer risk. These are all things that are have been said out there, right? That they're all genetically modified, that they cause indigestion. Let's quickly bust these myths with some research right here, right now. So the facts, actually, what the research shows us is that plants cannot contain a human hormone, right? An animal hormone. They contain beneficial phytoestrogen isoflavones that have a similar structure to estrogen, however, different effects. So they do not act the same as estrogen. This male feminizing effect, there was a meta-analysis published in 2010, 15 placebo-controlled treatment and 32 reports showing no significant effects on testosterone, sex hormone, binding globulin, or free androgen index. So it's just not true that soy is going to be affecting male hormones. That's simply not true. That studies across the board do not show that to happen. And as far as people being concerned that soy increases cancer risk, the complete opposite is true. A 2020 meta-analysis of prospective studies, including 300,000 Chinese women, found that for each 10 milligrams per day increment, so that's not a lot at all, that's a tiny amount, increase in soy isoflavone intake, it's associated with a 3% decreased risk of breast cancer. And that may sound like it's not a lot. However, over time and with amounts that are reasonable for eating throughout the day, it actually has been shown to decrease risk. And if you think about the populations where soy is more readily eaten, like in China, they actually have less incidence of estrogen-related diseases like breast cancer, like endometriosis. So it's really interesting to see that it's not at all correlated with an increase in cancer. In fact, it's the opposite. And circling back to the first myth that it contains estrogen, a lot of people think that soy leads to thyroid issues. And it may be that soy is an issue if you have an iodine deficiency. Iodine is extremely essential for thyroid function. Or if you have pre-existing thyroid disorder, like hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, if you Hashimoto's, you may want to talk to a dietitian about whether or not soy is going to be a good idea for you to take in. However, 2019, a systematic review and meta-analysis showing that soy supplementation has no effect on thyroid hormones. For healthy people, soy is very healthy for the entire body, including the thyroid. And not all soy is genetically modified. I do recommend, if you can, to try to purchase it organic, as a lot of it is unfortunately genetically modified, and a lot of it does have a lot of pesticides and spray on it, especially if you're at risk or if you do already have cancer, to try to purchase organic. And no, soy does not necessarily cause indigestion. Just like all beans, it's ensure that it's cooked properly. And in populations where they eat a lot of soy, it's often almost exclusively fermented, right? And things like tempeh, soy, miso, these are fermented soy products. So when we ferment things, they're a lot easier to digest.
Great, a lot of good info about soy. So about protein overconsumption. So we do know that most Americans, and not just Americans, but all over the world really nowadays, eat twice the recommended amount of protein. And as I feel we have emphasized a lot throughout this webinar, is that we don't want to have an excess of anything really. Like we want to have a synergy in our body by not having excess of any macronutrients really. So we do know that this could accelerate aging, as we saw with the insulin-like growth factor, for example, in many of the studies we have referred to. And what are really the reasons for protein overconsumption? So again, circling back to like with the media advertisement and like seeing the importance of protein everywhere, people are always thinking, oh, I need protein like all the time. Also, it's added to a lot of food products as well. So that's why we're here to educate more about the protein's role in the body and like how we can get it from a variety of sources. So how does protein relates to exercise, muscle mass, and longevity? So we often associate like muscle mass with protein. And I think, and also with weightlifting as well. And I think it's important to remember that it's not just like exercising and protein that contribute to the muscle mass, but just being active in general, like walking a lot, taking the stairs instead of escalators. We do, however, want to have the weight bearing and resistant exercise as well to strengthen the muscle and the bones. And throughout a day, when you do eat the majority of your protein, you want to focus on having it after your workouts, preferably within the first 1 to 2 hours of exercise. All right, so now we're gonna have a little quiz. So the first question is, which source of protein in general is associated with a longer lifespan, eggs or peas? So please put the questions in the chat box. Peas, eggs, peas. It's a tricky one. Yeah, a lot of good answers. So great. So because we're talking about longevity, the right answer is actually peas. And the reason is because, again, what we were talking about, the insulin-like growth factor, we know that eggs is a great source of protein. It has a high biological value. However, it triggers the IGF-1, which is related to acceleration of aging more than what a plant source of protein will do. So in this question, remember, we're talking about a longer lifespan. We're not talking about building muscles or other type of goals. But in terms of lifespan, the correct answer is peas. And then Katie is going to take the next question. Oh, you're muted, Katie.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say I love that people are paying attention, noticing that peas, because they're from plants, they are less bioavailable. They're less readily absorbed. So they're going to create less of a spike in growth factor, which is good for longevity. So yeah, peas is, I love that. People are really paying attention. Okay, number 2, does everyone benefit from lower protein? Mostly incomplete protein sources? No, over 65 may benefit from some animal protein. No, there's a bumper sticker with that on it. No, over age 65. Maybe not, older folks. Awesome. Yeah, so the correct answer to this is no, not everyone benefits from lower protein, right? And a lot of you are saying right over the age of 65, people are going to need a little bit more protein, but also maybe you're pregnant, maybe you're breastfeeding, maybe you are not an adult yet, maybe you're a kid and you're growing and you do need to have more. Maybe you're recovering from an injury or a burn and you really need to rebuild and you need more protein in that case as well. There's definitely some cases where maybe you have malabsorption, you have trouble absorbing certain things, you have gut issues. There's a lot of different reasons why you may need more protein. Maybe you're really over exercising, maybe you're an athlete. Like, just because this is the recommendation for longevity, it's not necessarily every single person is going to benefit. Everybody has their own goals and their own situation. Okay. What is one plant-based protein source that you are going to incorporate after this webinar? Anyone going to incorporate anything? Maybe
You're
that
not allowed to say peas.
peas. Nice. Soy, edamame, peanut butter, tempeh, chia, tempeh, quinoa. Already plant-based. All right. Beautiful. Yeah, these are great. I love a lot of people said tempeh. Tempeh and soy products were definitely some things I was intimidated by. I was afraid to try. But after learning more about how to prepare them and make them delicious, oh, so good. Nice. More soy, miso. I love it. Quinoa.
All right, so today was our second webinar of the longevity series. So the next one, everyone mark your calendar. It will be in June the 22nd. We will send out registration links for that. I think actually it's going to be here in the chat box. So you can already register for next month's webinar. And again, this is recorded and we will upload it on our YouTube channel as well, which will be provided in the newsletter that are sent out monthly.
And then one more time, do not miss out on these promotions. We are accepting new patients at the Create Cures Foundation. You can get 35% off your first consultation with this code. Really, I do not miss out on this. So if you didn't write down the code yet, please write it down. And there will be a link in the chat box as well to click and send an email, sign up for a consultation. And of course, as well, the masterclass, which is so incredible. Don't miss out on these promotions. Any questions, please do also send us an email. More than happy to help if there's any concerns that you have. And also we're going to be going over in the Q&A feature. Be sure to put your questions. I see some people writing their questions in the chat box. Go ahead to the Q&A feature and we're going to go ahead and answer your questions. Would you like to start off with that, Frida?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's many good questions here. So the first one, isn't it true that also that lowering the amount of carbs in the diet also equates to longevity? So again, carbohydrates, it's a very like general term. So it all depends on like what types of carbohydrates. We want to always emphasize complex carbohydrates, which are whole grains and carbohydrates that are not spiking the glucose as fast as sugar, like pure sugar, simple carbohydrates. Katie, I don't know if you want to add to that one.
Yeah, that was great. It depends on the quality, right? So we recommend a higher quality carbohydrate approach. And when it comes to lowering carbs, it's true. Of course, if we're taking in refined sugars, if we're taking in liquid sweeteners and fast absorbing things like orange juice, that also is going to increase that growth factor. Yeah, so that's a great question. All right, I'm going to answer this next one. How are muscle hypertrophy and hypercaloric dieting related to cancer development and growth? Is there scientific evidence that natural bodybuilding can promote cancer development, clinical studies on athletes as opposed to general population? Oh, I love this question so much because Frida and I were both athletes as well. And it's really interesting, the research that's out there. And what I've found is that actually earlier in this presentation, noticing the same amount of protein taken in with plants, with plant foods like soy, peas, beans, quinoa, even if it's the same amount of grams of protein, the plant protein group had less of an increase in insulin-like growth factor, which is why if you are going to be a natural plant-based bodybuilder, being plant-based, you're probably going to want to take in a little bit more protein or make sure that you are taking in that isolate, because if you're trying to build muscle, you do need more protein, and that's okay. Making sure you're taking in your protein after your workouts. So personally, unfortunately, I don't know the clinical studies at this time on that. Frida, I think you might actually have more expertise in this area if you want to follow up answering that a little bit further.
Yeah, no, you answered great, but yeah, I also love this question. And again, it's always like, what is the goal of like a person? So we talk a lot about longevity. What is the goal, like to live a long life, or is it to build muscle? versus performance. So sometimes there are a little trade-off depending on what our goal is with protein. However, as Katie mentioned, as long as it's you have like an appropriate amount of protein from the plant sources, it is possible to get adequate protein from these sources. But most people who are not maybe educated about like the different sources of plant protein sources that contain different amounts of amino acids, maybe they don't know how to get like the complete protein sources. So that's why it's important to either see a dietitian or be educated about that.
Right. And yeah, if you're going to be a bodybuilder, I would really hope that you're eating plenty of plant foods with it, because just because you're increasing your growth factor doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a chronic disease, right? It's important to also, you know, recover well, get plenty of sleep, eat plenty of vegetables. And yeah, that's a great question.
And the next one, again, are you saying that people over 65 years need more protein than young people? Yes, because as we age, we become more frail. We are not as active and we need to like stimulate the muscles. So that's why a little higher protein intake as well as some sources of animal protein is encouraged above 65 years as well.
Yeah, and over the age of 65 in general, the growth factor that our bodies make decreases. So it's important to eat more protein as we get older. Thoughts on organic soy? I need to avoid nasty chemicals at all costs. I think that organic soy is fantastic. I think that soy and soy products purchased organic, amazing. I think that go for it. Yeah. I'm going to answer this next one. If you are eating mostly plant-based, do you need to count the protein content to assure enough, or conversely to avoid too much protein? If you feel satisfied after your meals, and if you're tracking, what I would recommend is noticing your weight, making sure that you're not underweight or losing too much weight, and make sure you're eating enough. So if you're eating wholesome foods and you're not just eating, you know, Funyuns, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you're eating whole foods like beans, rice, peas, odds are you're going to be taking in enough protein just by feeling satisfied and just feeling balanced and grounded after each meal. However, I recommend, it wouldn't hurt, just for peace of mind, to look into at the clinic. We have an in-body scanner where we can see the difference between your lean body mass, your water weight, and your fat mass. And it's really nice to be able to track that over time as you transition to a more plant-based approach, because then we can see, oh, wow, it looks like you're losing muscle mass. Oh, wow, it looks like you're able to gain muscle mass here. So just tracking that can help to have peace of mind to show, oh my gosh, wow, I actually get really excited when my patients, they think that they would lose muscle, or they're really afraid of losing muscle. And then they find out, oh my gosh, I'm eating this little protein and I'm gaining muscle. It is possible. And it's cool to see those numbers instead of just be questioning that. Also, we at the clinic, it's going to be a good idea to use that promo code and get on one of our calendars, because we have a professional nutrient analysis account where it's really nice to be able to track and check in with us. And we can see on our end, okay, are you taking in enough protein? What are you taking in too much? And how to really optimize that. We help our patients a lot with that all the time. Do you want to add something, Frida?
No, I just, like you said, it's important to get it from a variety of sources, just making sure you get all those essential amino acids. And love how you emphasize like doing the body composition to really monitor like the muscle mass. We want to make sure we don't decrease in muscle mass. So again, an individual approach is very important when it comes to protein.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, so what about patients with end-stage renal disease who are typically advised to eat high biologic value protein and often lose muscle mass? Great question. So this is a very special population, so we don't want to follow like any types of general recommendation for this condition as well. So it's important to talk to the medical doctor about this. Yeah, Katie, do you want to add to that one?
No, you answered that. I think you answered that perfectly, right? This is one of those interesting populations. There's different autoimmune diseases as well, where people have, they don't have functioning guts. Like there's just different situations where we're going to need to recommend more high biologic value protein.
Exactly.
Sure.
And also one of the populations, in addition to people above 65 years, are people who have muscle loss. They have, again, specialized protein needs, so they should not follow like the typical longevity protein recommendations. So just clarifying again, there's a lot of question about 65 years and above. Yes, the protein needs are a little bit different. Then there's another question about, excuse me, are plant sources complete proteins or incomplete? So what we were saying, often we think of animal protein, they do contain all the essential amino acids, which is a complete protein source. When it comes to plant-based sources, there are complete sources there as well. You just have to be aware of which one, and some of the examples of complete proteins of plant sources are quinoa, hemp, soy, for example. Or you can actually pair different proteins together, and then you get the whole profile of the essential amino acids.
Right. Yeah, the thing is that people don't realize is that all wholesome plant foods, they do contain all of the essential amino acids, just in different proportions. So that's why it's so confusing. And some of them, like Frida mentioned, are much, much more complete. They have the right proportions that are really bioavailable. But that's not necessarily what's recommended for longevity. It's a little confusing, but yeah, that you explained that well. I hope that makes sense. I feel like for some people it takes a second to wrap their heads around that, like, oh, plant sources are complete, but they're not. They're not as complete as these other ones, which is a good thing. I hope that makes sense.
Maybe we have time for a couple more questions.
Does tempeh need to be organic, or does fermenting process negate that? I recommend you do purchase organic, whether or not it's fermented, just because so the fermented process does not negate that at all. When it comes to you making sure that you're not taking in chemicals and making sure that this is not a genetically modified product, which may be fine, right? But when it comes to cancer patients and people with autoimmune conditions, it's going to be important that we take away as much chemical exposure, radiation exposure. We want to take that possibility away. So even if it is fermented, I do recommend, if possible, I know it might be a little bit more expensive, but I think it would be a good idea to for sure use the organic products, especially with things like soy and corn, things that are often sprayed a lot and genetically modified.
Right. I just want to choose one like very applicable question here. So there's a question of examples of what incomplete proteins mix well with each other. So some example is, the classic one is beans and rice, because both of them are missing an amino acid, but the other one contains it. So together they are a complete protein source, as well as peanut butter and a whole wheat toast, for example, is another good example. So that was a great question. For all the other questions that we did not get to, feel free to email either Katie or myself, and we will be happy to answer them, because now the time is up.
Yeah.
But
yeah, our emails are right there. Be sure to send us an email. I hope to see y'all on my calendar. And yeah,
and make sure June 22nd, we will talk about fasting. So that will be a very cool topic to touch on.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.